Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that everybody enjoyed lunch, but not so much, so don't take a nap now. We wanted to do an in-person one, and of course, we are centered here in Maryland. So that kind of gave us the motivation to have some local flavor to it. So our next speaker, who I'd like to introduce, is Jerome Spears. He's a native of Baltimore, a lot of history here. He's got a lot of great background. He's a 30-year retired Army officer, and he's one of the best visual phasers that I know. He's been working with that, especially small segments. So, he defies even what, some of the experts says with his work. So I think you're going to enjoy his presentation. So it's great to welcome you, Jerome.
Thank you, Andy. Hello, everyone, and hello, everyone out there in TV land. Hopefully, you all are here to see Cornerstones of Discovery. This is a visually intensive presentation. But first, let me thank my family and all the people who helped me by providing me with DNA, because I couldn't do it without them. I also want to thank the Africans, Australians, and Europeans that you're going to be seeing in this slide. Without their cooperation, I would be who knows where. But this is going to be an intensive presentation in terms of visually. You're going to see a lot of stuff. If visual phasing is new to you, then I would encourage you to go to YouTube and pick up Andy Lee, or go to the working group that Blaine has. Those are two great sources that you can go to get the nuts and bolts of this topic, because there's just too many acronyms and terms and things that come into play to do justice to this topic in just 30 minutes or just 40 minutes. But we will be going through this visually phasing roadmap as best we can. I will try, if I'm on the slide for more than a second or two, feel free to speed read. If I go even faster than that, or if the type is small or busy or redacted, just let my narration get you through what we're trying to do. So with that, let's get started. Many, many years ago, in one of the Alex Haley miniseries, it was stated that the two most important days in your life are as follows. The first is the day you were born, and the second is the day you find out why. So going from right to left, I'm a tree climber, genealogy researcher, citizen scientist, but I'm kind of really warming up to this term genetic explorer as I study the people and places on this place we call planet Earth. I'm looking for my people. The stories need to be told. So you might say, well, you're looking for them. Where did they go? Well, they're here. They're nested in between my Y DNA and my mitochondrial DNA and all the areas in between. I'm an American of triracial descent, predominantly African. Some might refer to me as a walking, talking ethnicity rainbow coalition. My DNA lights up like a Christmas tree. I have a lot of international connections. I'm also from a heavily endogamous place called St. Mary's County in Southern Maryland. Endogamy is kind of a situation where over many, many generations, many lines, you end up being related to everyone else. So in the center, this is my cousin, James Spears. He and I are an exact Y DNA match to my great-grandfather, John Allen Spears. I descend from John Allen via Lucille Purvey, and James extends via the wife that he later married, Mary Scriber. So we're half-second cousins on the Spears side or paternal side of the family. His father, Eugene, who's also pictured, on his mother's side, he's also a Bankins, a Smith, and a Fenwick. And so we're Bankins' third cousins on the maternal side as well. So all I can say is welcome to Southern Maryland. I could give you a lot more examples that are even more extensive than this, but you kind of get the idea. And we're going to circle back to Eugene in a little bit. So coming out of the Mid-Atlantic region, my DNA spans the globe. It travels every waterway, touches almost every landmass on the planet. If we look at Ancestry's account, you can see their ethnicity reading for me, but we're all told to swim, hunt, and fish in multiple lakes. And so in doing that, here are my results from some of the various testing companies. On the bottom, you see African on the left, Native American is on the right, and the European is holding down the center. Here's my cousin, Greg Bankins. He and I are descended from Basil Bankins, our great-great-grandfather. I mapped to Basil via 3 women. Greg maps to him via 3 men. And as such, we were able to Y-DNA test Greg as well. And his DNA maps through Basil all the way back to Africa. Africa, where it all began. This is where the history and the traditions were started, where things would have begun to be passed down. Even through the period of enslavement in the Americas, Basil would have eventually passed down what he knew to his granddaughter, Marie. Marie would have passed down what she knew to her daughter, my Aunt Helena. Aunt Helena, still with us, 97 years young, by the way. My grandmother, before she died, and my Aunt Helena passed the baton to me. And now in 2023, the question is, who's next? But the narrative continues, and we hope that someone will step into the breach. We can't pay these people back for all that they did for us over the years. The way we can honor them mostly is to pay it forward. And so this is why I'm here, to pay it forward. And I'm anchoring a lot of my efforts into the ultimate truth serum called DNA. But maybe time has already run out on me. After all, I didn't get a chance, besides for my 97-year-old aunt, I didn't get a chance to test my mother, my father. I didn't get a chance to test any of my other aunts or uncles. I didn't get a chance to test any of my grandparents. Perhaps all was lost. But then Kathy and Randy came along. And then Blaine came along. And then Andy came along. All I can say to these folks is thank you, thank you, thank you. The visual phasing technique was something that was like a breath of fresh air. It threw me a lifeline. It offered me a virtual helping hand, and don't know what I would do without it at this point. Particularly when we look at the highlighted part where it says if you've got 5 or more siblings, you can potentially gather up all of the DNA from your parents and grandparents. That's pretty good. So in my family, I'm one of 5 siblings. We're commonly referred to as the Spears 5. So why take one bite out of the apple when using the Spears 5, we can gobble that whole thing up? There's strength in numbers. We talk about there being 50% of DNA from your mother and 50% from your father. Well, if you add those two together, you get 100%. And so if we look at the base and the U in this particular diagram, we can substitute the U singular for the Spears 5 plural. It's a lot more power in that number. And combined with that, along with an army of cousins who you specifically know how they map back to their individual grandparents, you can do some unique and special things. And in part, you can go from 100% at your parents' level back one generation to at or near 100% at your grandparents' level. Put another way, we can go from hemispheric DNA to what I call quadrant DNA. And it's all there. So, oh, I went too fast. So here is my laydown, my 23 chromosomes. There are no gaps, there are no holes, there are no dead spots. This is all of the DNA that my parents passed through their parents to me. And I'm more Gant than Spears. I'm more Bankins than Jordan. So once you get to the grandparent level, it's not a cookie cutter 25%. It's a very fluid and dynamic process. If we look at the visual phasing outputs for all of my siblings, you can see another Christmas tree. It lights up pretty well. This back and forth, this ebb and flow. Each chromosome has its own unique flavor. It's a dynamic process. You can't set your watch when you might have a chromosome start or stop. And it's because at the grandparent level, there's a tug of war going on. And these grandparents are struggling as best they can to work through their parents to get as much of their DNA from them down to the grandchildren. And they're doing this at the expense of their partner. So in any given instance, you've got a grandmother on one side, you've got a grandfather on the other side that's doing the same thing. And that's the nature of how this works. So in this case, that's why you're getting a 24, 26% breakout. As it relates to the whole recombination process, there's two ways this can happen. And one is this grandparent to grandparent tug of war that I've mentioned. But the second way it can happen is when the individual grandparent has a crossover at their individual level. And so both of these types of DNA can come down and create new segments for the folks that come behind. So here's a kind of a breakout of the visual phase, and we can see the RP, which is a shorthand for recombination point. In my view, the recombination or genetic recombinations are something that happen up and down the line over and over. It's something that you really have to keep your eye on. It's a very integral part of this whole process. I refer to genetic recombination as being the elephant in the room. So if genetic recombination is the elephant in the room, what happens when what I call the mighty mouse of endogamy steps into the picture? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. But for now, we've got the Spears 5 and their own individual breakout. We can see at the bottom their grandparent distributions. And again, you don't see any cookie cutter 25% values there. So it gives you some idea of how this is being a fluid process from sibling to sibling. Once you get your DNA, those are the cards that you were dealt. That's the hand that you were given. And so you can use that in combination to really start doing some special things. But can we go back further? Can we go beyond the grandparents? Can we locate, isolate, and identify with accuracy and confidence data beyond that? And I would say that genetic visual phasing is by design, once completed, a deep dive chromosome by chromosome evaluation discovery method, which allows for the microscopic identification of specific inherited DNA segments regarding one's ancestors. So it kind of makes it sound like I'm saying, yeah, you can go a little bit further back. But before we do that, let's do some house cleaning. In my younger years, when I was a musician, I never quite got the handle on sheet music. In fact, even songs I wrote, I had to get my more talented brother to score for me. When I moved over to the DNA domain, I decided that I wanted to learn how to read, understand, and interpret the sheet music of DNA. And so the stoplight can be very helpful in kind of setting the table for this process: full match, half match, and no match. This is a very busy slide, only meant to just show you at the very top that in the jet match environment, those red, yellow, and green symbols give you an idea of those changes, those recombinations. And what you see in a jet match environment are those pretty colors at the top. But what you really have, and this is a sibling example, what you really have are the paternal and maternal chromosome pairs for each of the two siblings in this example. I'll move to a less busy slide to flush this out a little bit further. So in this example, my sister Renee, if in this area 1, she's getting Spears DNA, and GEDmatch is calling this a no match area, then Nason would have to be getting Gantt DNA in that same area. Likewise, if Renee is getting Bankin's DNA on the maternal side, Nason would have to be getting the opposite, Jordan DNA, in that same area, thus the no match area. Moving to the far left side of the chromosome, there's another no match area at the very beginning. But if a tug of war assumes, like in the bottom corner, between Bankins and Jordan, and Grandpop Jordan tugs the rope a little harder than Grandma Bankins can stand, she's going to lose ownership of that DNA in that area. And the coding in GEDmatch is going to move from red to yellow, because in that area, in area 2, Nason now has Jordan DNA, just like Renee. And so they're half matched. And in this final example, another tug of war between Grandma Gant and Grandpop Spears. Grandpop Spears tugs the rope a little harder, gains control. And when that change happens, the DNA moves from Gant to Spears. And in that, now both Nason and Renee both have Spears and Jordan DNA, and the GEDmatch chromosome browser reflects a green for a full match. So why put in the time? Why exert the effort to learn all of this? Is the juice here really worth the squeeze? Well, my hope is that by the time we're done, we'll all feel like it's worth it. So now let's go to a live fire exercise. We'll start with 2 cousins or 2 individuals on chromosome 13, lucky chromosome 13. We'll add my brother to the equation, and my brother seems to match both of these individuals, even though the 2 individuals don't match each other. But there seems to be some overlap. So is something going on here or what? A little bit more information added to the equation maybe helps to clarify things a little bit more. And if I add Nason's visual phase output, it kind of becomes clear that yes, Nason does match Butch, Nason does match Greg, but they're matching in 2 separate hemispheres. And so the DNA in this area is doing what you would expect it to do. Okay, we're on a roll, let's keep going. How about if we take Butch, put him in the driver's seat, and do a triangulation drill, or a triangulation query using the Spears 5 and cousin Greg, the maternal match. Well, some might say, why would you triangulate on the Spears 5? This is supposed to be a measure of A equaling B, and A equaling C, and B equaling C, where you're getting 3 different outputs. All you're going to get from the Spears 5 is, particularly if they're matching each other, information from the same source. So it's just going to be like A equals B and nothing more. Well, in the visual phasing environment, I can use the Spears 5 and this evaluation as a kind of a cheat sheet or sanity check against my visual phase. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. I'll also be able to see Greg wash out because he does not match Butch. He won't be part of the triangulation drill. So it's just a way that you can use triangulation for more than the ways people generally will use it. So we'll look at the chromosome browser for Nason, just the paternal side, because in this situation, it's just paternal DNA that we're looking at. Anything to the left of that recombination point is going to be Gant DNA between Nason and Butch. Anything to the right of that recombination point is going to be Spears DNA. And so when we do the triangulation, we get some clustering in there. And one of the things, because you can't see it, but Greg did wash out. He's not there, and he shouldn't be, because he's maternal, and this is a paternal evaluation. But we do notice that Renee and Sandy, 2 siblings of Nason, are also in this area. And hopefully you all can see this, that Sandy has a 22.8 centimorgan match in this area with everyone else. And Nason and Renee have a 31.8, I think that says, match with at least Butch and them. So if we were to scale that out and look at it in the visual phaser, we can see that that all makes sense, because in Sandy's instance, she had one of those pesky recombinations kick in, and that's why her match with Butch, which otherwise would have been as long as Nason's and Renee's, is not quite there. Recombination stepped in once again. And my sister and I aren't in that particular match at all, because in that area, we're not getting Gant DNA, we're getting the Spears DNA. So this is checking out, it's behaving in the way we would expect it to. If we move from the Gant side of this equation to the Spears side, in this area, all 5 of the Spears 5 seem to be involved in one way or another. But in my particular case, I have a small 10 centimorgan amount of DNA compared to my other siblings who are almost twice as much, 19.9 centimorgans. And so what's happening here? Well, Another recombination between Gant and Spears is impacting me and me only, not my other siblings. And as a result, I'm getting the shorter amount because of a recombination. And so this is all playing out in the way we would expect it to. And so this is a kind of a good news story. We can pack it up and say we're done here. But the genetic explorer in me wants to see if there's a little more we can figure out. Not on the paternal side, but in this instance, on the maternal side, where we washed out our cousin Greg earlier. So we're going to move from here and here at the top on the paternal side, where we have much more comfortable and reliable 20 centimorgan plus values, down here into the single digit domain, that area that has so many tricky things that can come into play, to include, in some cases, false positive matches. So why is this match so small? It's an 8.8 centimorgan match that Greg and Nason have in this area. Nason has a lot of Bankin's DNA to the right limit of this match. In fact, he's the only of the Spears 5 that has Bankin's DNA. The rest of us have Jordan at the end of the chromosome, and yet his match is still very small. Could it be that there is a recombination point seeping in there some way? And the other point to keep in mind is that Greg's grandparents get to vote too. And so there could be a recombination that's impacting this, not from the Jordan Bankin side, which is my family, but the Bankins Johnson side, which is Greg's family. So, but we're just beginning this, so let's keep going and see where it ends up. I can go to the my army of siblings and grab the Bankins 3, visual phase their chromosome 13, so that I can see this for comparison. And so here are Lisa, Elver, and Greg, minus the far left edge, their output for chromosome 13 as well. Here I'm putting in Nason's match just so that we can see it for comparison's sake. And you notice where I have the asterisks. Yes, there is a recombination point from Greg's grandmother, Marie, but that's happening in the neighborhood. It's not directly impacting where all this activity is happening. But there is one thing that we know when we're looking at Greg. Greg being the third cousin, his DNA is going from my mother to her mother, back to the most recent common ancestors of Basil Bankins and Camilla Smith. That's a fact that we know. So if I take the match that Nason has and look at it against all of the Bankins 3, we can now go through a couple of processes where the first thing I want to do is do a segment search to vacuum up any individuals that might be in the vicinity of this match that I'm studying. So we do the segment search. Then I want to do a triangulation in the area to see if any of these individuals, like my cousin Barbara and my brother, who's in what I call group 2, pull up. At the very bottom, there's a third area that only Renata matches. And so looking at this at the bottom, I think I have 3 numbers. Well, we can't see the 3 numbers, but there are 3 numbers across the bottom. I've broken this up into position 1, position 2, and position 3. So if we drill down into this a little further, we can see Nason and Greg matching in position 2. We can see Renata and Greg matching in position 3. We can see Barbara and Greg matching in positions 1 and 2. And we can see Nason and Barbara matching in positions 2 and 3. Renata and Barbara aren't matching at all. So in just going through this exercise, we've been able to tease out and see that there are some things going on here. At the very bottom, it's clear this is Greg's chromosome 13 phase. You can see the line that indicates where his Bankins DNA stops and the Marie DNA stops or starts. So this is all Bankins DNA. It's just different varieties of Bankins DNA. And so yet again, now what was invisible before is now visible. We can see that there's some indication of some recombinations that are happening here. So what is this really telling us? What can we get out of this? Well, in one part of this, it means that on chromosome 13, Basil Bankins and Camilla Smith are speaking to us. We are all related, all of us, the folks that are imaged up here, all related through this chromosome in this area. And so this is something that we're able to discern by going through these types of activities. So it's goodness in being able to do that. So let's see. So we've talked about this whole thing dealing with these particular spots. We know that Basil Bankins or Camilla Smith own that spot that Nason and Greg are matching. And it would be great if we were able to tease out and further figure out exactly who amongst the two own that spot. If we're able to do that, we're going to be able to additionally be able to figure out all the other position ownership by default. So the unfortunate thing is that in trying to do this, even working with my army of cousins, we found that it was a bridge too far. I just didn't have enough nuggets to really pin this down and sort out exactly which of the two great-great-grandparents owned that first spot. But we can kind of park this and make this a future assessment, such that if we determine or if we later find out that Basil owns position 2, that's going to mean that Camilla is going to own position 3, and the rest of that DNA is going to flush out in this way. Note the recombination location for Barbara and Greg in this instance. If we flip this and the DNA actually belongs to Camilla Smith, well, then the rest of it is going to fall out as follows, and the recombination point will still be there, but the ownership between Basil and Camilla will just simply be reversed. So there's goodness in being able to do this. So if we circle back just for a while to this other area, we know that in looking at the visual phase that Nason has that 8 centimorgan match there. But if the visual phase is holding true, I should have a snippet of that as well, even though it's encumbered by that pesky Jordan recombination. So if we pull up the Bankins 3 and look at all of the DNA garnered from Nason and Greg, and then all of the DNA garnered from myself and Greg, we see that in fact the visual phasing was correct. I do have a smaller but still present amount of DNA that's in that area as well. And if we ever get to the point where we find out the ownership of that specific segment, I want to individually be included in that celebration. Okay, so that's the end of the live fire. What I'll say here is that I've got over 24,000 matches in Ancestry. And Ancestry says of those matches, about 23,000 of them are distant. So in my lifetime, I will never be able to evaluate all of those matches. I do want to be productive, and I want to be as efficient as possible. So here's how I view getting into matches like this. If I'm on the right chromosome, say chromosome 13, and I'm on the right side of the chromosome, say maternal, and I'm aligned to the right grandparent, say Bankins, and I'm using the Spears 5 visual phasing process, which I've done, and I'm looking at the specific spatial location, say 108 to 111, and I'm having no other known or potential conflicts to have to consider, then this match is going to be considered a valid match. The segment would fit all of the criteria for being part of the established 100% accounted for DNA that was brought into view upon successfully completing at the grandparent level the visual phasing process to begin with. And there's a bonus. Suppose one of my brother or one of my sisters has a son or a daughter that we can phase their DNA and take a look at that. And so my brother does have a son, Alex, and in looking at Alex, he has an 8.8 centimorgan match in that same area as well. And even if the match was smaller than that due to a recombination, it would still be regarded as a valid set of DNA because we're looking at it holistically with a lot of information. Okay, so I'm looking for my people between the Y and the mitochondrial and everything in between. They need to be allowed to speak. So here's a bonus. My cousin Eugene on chromosome 1, there's something going on there. My sister and brother Nason, they have a full match with Eugene on chromosome 1. On the paternal side, it's Spears. On the banking side, it's Jordan. But there's a pesky little recombination point with Nason between Gant and Spears, which helps us to differentiate between whether or not this is happening on the paternal side versus the maternal side, because the match would be even on the maternal side. On the paternal side, it's going to be impacted by that recombination point. Thus, Carlin's getting 8.3 centimorgans, Nason's getting 6.4. So the DNA can be an indicator in getting into the weeds at that level. So, like I said, another recombination steps into the picture. Well, let me introduce someone else to the picture, Penny Walters. Now, many of you may know Penny, and you're saying, well, how is Penny going to work into this equation between your cousin Eugene and your two siblings on chromosome 1? I'll explain. So this is Penny, and her two sons are on the right. They're on both sides of their Ghanaian grandmother. Spoiler alert, it's about to be a match here between the Americans and the grandmother. On chromosome 1, they match. And we've already resolved that this is the same match that we were just looking at. So this is Spears-related DNA. And the Gant-Spears recombination point helps us to make that distinction. Penny told me that this family goes back in Ghana many, many, many generations. So we're now looking at yet another one of our chromosomes who's found its way back home. And we've done the triangulation just as a backup as well. So just to make sure everything still lines up pretty well. So these recombinations are something that if we work that into the equation, a lot of times that can help us solve a lot of our problems if we're in a position to be able to do that. So going into the ancestry environment, they picked up this international match as well, at least 2 of the 3. They have Ernest and they have Carlin, but they didn't get Nason. And their explanation was that Nason was either not a DNA match or he hadn't tested. And I'll contend that there's a third possibility, that when Ancestry got rid of the 6 and 7 centimorgan segments, by doing that, they also made my brother's tangible evidence, in this case, back to Africa, go away as well. But we got 5 siblings, and we're swimming, hunting, and fishing in multiple lakes. And so we can certainly take Ancestry's no and turn it into a jet match yes, and keep it moving. No valid DNA should be left behind. So I want to thank Penny for providing me with a lot of this information to help know some additional aspects of this situation. And it's amazing what can happen when your DNA touches so many different parts of the world. Parts of the world like Queensland and Australia, where we've got a 300-year-old Penhaligon segment of DNA on chromosome 11 that we visually phased and verified against many of my Jordan and Mason folks. This is a balanced DNA segment. Here's a 7 centimorgan segment on chromosome 16 with a Nigerian woman and her son that my sister Carlin and I matched. This is a valid DNA segment. On Ancestry, they called it a 6 centimorgan segment, which I had to scurry to keep from going away when they pulled the plug on these small segments. I was also able to catch up with Tolaranju and get him to move the DNA on his mother from Ancestry into GEDmatch. And in doing so, I could do additional research. Tolaranju and I, almost 3 years to the day, had a memorable Alex Haley Kunta Kinte like "we found you" moment, even though it was done via Zoom. So the hits just keep on coming when you're really working at this level. Each chromosome pair tells its own narrative. And each chromosome segment on a given chromosome has its own subplot. In this situation, this is grandparent to grandchild DNA. And at the bottom, you start with a blank canvas of 64 centimorgans of DNA. And through some processes, we can we can transform this DNA into an ancestor by ancestry history going back in time and be able to discern with specifics which grandparent, in Renee's case, is giving this DNA to her grandchild. And in doing that, if we see matches with Ramez, say on the banking side, that might be in this 20 centimorgan range, it's in the same area, it's aligned with the same logic, we would assess that as being valid. If we see a 10 centimorgan match with in the Spears area, or even smaller, if it's in the right place on the right side, and we know the history, I would not tell Ramez that that small match in that area is not a valid match. I think it's the old soldier in me that just believes we should not leave any valid discoverable DNA behind. So going back to chromosome 13 just for a second, Greg and his Bankins 3, along with the Spears 5, we were able to ancestor tag a segment of DNA going back almost 190 years on chromosome 13, back to our most recent common ancestors. This is all coming from a small, single 8 centimorgan segment. So there's goodness in being able to do this. Let's see. So going back many generations, we can locate, isolate, and identify with accuracy and confidence. We can find our people. Now, real quick on endogamy. On the right, on the left is my cousin Gary. On the right is my cousin Greg. Gary's a second cousin, Greg's a third cousin. Their DNA is responding in the ways you would expect to see the DNA react to the Spears 5. And all of this Bankins DNA is mapping through one grandparent, our grandparent Bankins. Here, on the other hand, my cousin Gwen, she's a fourth cousin, so even further distantly related than the two we just left. And yet her DNA totals surpass the DNA totals we just saw for second and third cousins. She's mapping to all 4 of my grandparent lines. She's got numerous small segments in numerous locations all over the map. This is endogamy. Okay, so we've traveled the world and touched a lot of places. The whole intent here is just to say that if your DNA is hitting a lot of places, you're going to have a lot of interesting places to go and a lot of research that's going to take you places you would never think you would end up going. I'll stop here, but the search will go on. The more we dig, the more we find. I think I've covered everything on the roadmap, and I'll just leave you with share and collaborate, leave no DNA behind, and find someone to pass the baton to and pay it forward. With that, I'll take any of your questions. Yes.
So, I'm familiar with doing the visual phasing for 3 siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done it several times now. How do you add the extra siblings in? It's too complicated. I mean,
No, I would very much suggest that you go to Andy Lee's tutorials on YouTube. He's got about 5 tutorials at about 90 minutes apiece. So you want to bring your lunch, but he will walk you through the steps on how to get there.
more than 3.
More than.
I've seen this one's on 3.
I think he does. Well, you know what? I've seen him do 2, and I've seen him do 3. Okay, you go to Blaine's working group, and there'll be plenty of people there that can help in that environment.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Oh boy, I tell you, it took me over a year to do all 5 of the Spears 5, and that was in part learning curve and everything else, and getting twisted and tangled and messing with the Steve Fox automated way, and saying, oh, then they went from something happened where they changed the thing in Jet Match and they made the data longer, and now that hiccuped so I just stuck with the longhand way and doing it in PowerPoint, but it took over a year to get it done. Yeah.
That makes me think that the more you do like adoptions or you work on your own family, you start realizing faster ways to do it. Have you started another project that you can build from what you just did in the past year and find out it's getting better at it?
Well, in that Bankins example, when I was doing the Bankins 3, I already had Banking's DNA carved out on my family. So I could use those settings from my lines to help set where the Banking's DNA was hitting the Banking's folks on their side. And so that made me sorting through that drill with them a lot easier. So I guess the short answer is yes, you do get better at it as you go. Yeah. Well, I was doing some queries, and well, I think I said I was policing. I did the segment search, and then I did a triangulation. I think in the segment search, I saw Penny Walters' name in the box to this name I didn't know, and I said, Penny, who is this? Who is this person? Oh, do I have a story to tell you? And she started sending me pictures, and we had a good time. So that's how we got Penny involved. Any questions in TV land? Okay. Oh, yeah.
How is your success going at getting the next generation involved, passing this on to someone?
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. I don't know if, well, I need to be positive. I don't have a successor yet. And maybe the successor's yet to be born. I hate putting it that way, but that could be where I'm at. And could be that that's the case. I may not see who the successor is. So one of the things I do, I date, I timestamp everything. You know, when we're doing this, you know, you'll find something and you're going, oh, I wonder when this happened or where this was. So I'm trying to drop a number of crumbs, because if it turns out that it does take 2 or 3 generations removed from me for somebody to want to do this, I want to try to put them in as good a position as I believe my ancestors put me in to get me this far. So that is one thing I'm trying to do, but I sure hope somebody breathing comes along quick. Yeah. I go through, I don't know how many, you know, when you're applying to college, you send out 100 letters and you get back three replies. I send out 100 things on these sites all the time with the hope of 2 or 3 or 5 people responding. And so why did the 2 or 3 respond and the other 95 didn't? Well, everybody's got their life and things are going on, but maybe in putting out 100 queries and you get 5, maybe in that 5 is going to be a gem that's going to help you. So you just have to flood the zone a little bit and hope that more people start to, as Blaine talked about this morning, get the bug. You know, we need another one of those booms like we had where people just get fired up about this stuff, and who knows where we can go from there.
Get one on my
Okay.
Nancy said, did you have trouble working out the ends of the chromosome?
I didn't find, and maybe it's because I have 5 siblings. You know, those recombination points can get tricky. If you're doing it with 2, or if you're doing it with 3, sometimes you may miss a recombination. But when you got 5 siblings in the game, they're biting that apple pretty hard, and you just have this power in numbers. And so I didn't find that to be that much challenging. But again, I had 5 siblings to work with, so maybe that's part of why it worked out so easily for me. I shouldn't say easily. It took me a year to do this.
It takes a long time.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, folks. Well, that's it. Thanks for coming and appreciate it.